I'd now like to introduce our next session, and that is our panel, Renewable Integration in Action. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers joining us for this session, all of whom are working on some exciting renewable integration projects around the country. Now, just a reminder to everyone that this is an interactive session, so attendees, you can all submit a question to all or any of our panel members individually. Just look for that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and use that to type in your question. I'll be going through all of the questions and asking them to our panellists as the session goes on. But for now, let's get things underway by bringing our three speakers up on screen now. I'll introduce them all by name and title, and then we'll get things underway with each of our panellists telling us a little bit more about their current roles and their backgrounds in the industry. So joining us today, we have Greg Hannan, who is the Head of Network Strategy and Non-Network Solutions at Citipower and Powercor. We have Dr. Hedda Ransan-Cooper, who is the Social Science Leader of the Battery Storage and Grid Integration Program at ANU. And we have Ray Achemedei, who is the General Manager, Technology and Digital Transformation at Horizon Power. And as I said, now that I've got you all on screen, let's kick things off by having you each introduce yourselves in a little bit more detail. So Hedda, I'll go to you first. Tell us a little bit more about your current role and your background in the energy industry as well.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks so much for inviting me to be involved in this panel. So my background is in, broadly, the environmental social sciences. I've conducted research in this space for about 15 years, but I got interested in energy through a coal seam gas project exploring the kind of social and political dimensions of that back in 2016. And then I subsequently got involved in, some of you may have heard of the Bruny Island Battery Project, an ARENA-funded project down in Tasmania. So that was my sort of first foray into DER and its relationship with the grid. And so, yeah, so I now work at ANU with the Battery Storage and Grid Integration Program, where I lead our social science work. And I suppose that involves working quite closely with colleagues from different backgrounds and disciplines like power systems and engineering, but also data science and software development. And really my role is to ensure that we're building in key concerns from the public, from customers, and concerns and risks and potential opportunities into the design of our techno-economic work that we do. So I suppose we aim in many ways to hold a mirror back to the energy sector and ask some kind of challenging questions around all of our respective roles in contributing to the multiple sort of energy transitions that are underway, and how do these match up with public expectation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hedda. There certainly would have been some interesting learning during your time working on those coal seam gas projects. And I'm sure that has continued over the years that you've been involved in energy. So it'll be really great to hear a little bit more from you and just hear a bit more of your expertise on how we can best manage customers and how we can best provide solutions that people are looking for. Greg, I'll go down to you now. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your current role and your background in the industry?
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Laura, and thanks for having us today. Yeah, so my role here is at Citipower, Powercor and UE, and I'm Head of Network Strategy and Non-Network Solutions. So really great portfolio. And the job is to really identify and pursue the opportunities that are arising for our businesses, our networks and our customers from the energy transition. So we run a portfolio of demand management programs, and we're looking to actively deploy more storage onto the grid. And so basically my team is there to trial these new opportunities, firm them up and see them transition into a VAU sense as soon as possible. So a really exciting role. Really enjoying the dynamic working with customers and trying to make the grid work for the benefit of all of us in this country. And my background is I've had nearly 20 years in the sector across a whole range of different portfolios, but I've advised government, worked in networks and the retail side of it. And sort of all of that has now combined to where we are today. So really excited about the opportunities and how we've been able to deliver for our customers. So thanks, Laura.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, really looking forward to hearing about some of those projects that you have happening at Citipower and Powercor. And finally, Ray, we'll go to you. Just tell us a little bit more about your role and your background, please.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. So as Laura mentioned, my name's Achemedei. I'm the General Manager of Technology and Digital Transformation at Horizon Power. At Horizon, I lead the Technology and Digital Transformation Division, which simply put is focused on two key things. Partnering with our business on our journey to become a digital utility by 2025 and developing our microgrids into high penetration advanced DER systems that can help us mitigate expensive network replacement and augmentation, but also enable, of course, the higher renewable integration. So two very exciting areas for us and the industry at the moment, obviously. Over the last 30 years, I've held senior technology roles in Australia and the UK, predominantly though in the mining and resources sector. So with the likes of Rio Tinto, Iluka Resources, Pacific Mining, Fortescue Metals, etc. So Horizon's actually my first foray into the electricity sector. So I'm happy to admit that I'm still very much learning about the industry and the challenges and the opportunities. A quick little bit about Horizon for those that aren't aware of us. We're a vertically integrated utility. We provide generation, transmission, distribution, retail throughout regional and remote WA. So our service area encompasses approximately 2.3 million square kilometres. It's the largest geographical catchment of any energy provider in Australia. Which means, I guess, fundamentally our approach for each microgrid needs to be tailored to meet unique needs of some of the most isolated remote communities in the world. And I guess that's part of the exciting aspect of the role that I've got at the moment is working through that problem space and trying to help identify the right solutions for each and every one of those microgrids.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. Really looking forward to chatting with you a little bit more and learning about how things are going in terms of the transition over on the West Coast. All right, let's dive in with our first question for the session today. To get us started, I'm really keen to hear everyone's thoughts on how Australia is tracking on our renewable energy journey. So I want to know, in each of your minds, are we moving quickly enough when it comes to the energy transition? And I guess perhaps more importantly, are we doing enough to ensure that we handle the transition in the most efficient and effective way possible? Greg, I might go to you first on this one. Can you share your thoughts on that one for us, please?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Look, great question. My observation really is that, things have the pace has quickened. So, things are moving really quickly, and that's coming about because of obviously government policy drivers, but also customers and technology. So there's been a real confluence, and it's almost as if, in following a disrupted year last year, on the back of a bit of a, new COVID normal, we're seeing an acceleration of change. And so I think, look, I'm not going to say things are moving too quickly or too slowly, but I think that it's pretty clear in the industry where things are headed, and there's a lot of effort to make sure that our businesses and our customers and the grids are set up for success. And I think it's a recognition that we've just got to get on and sort of build the solutions and collaborate and sort of have a kind of a fresher mindset because the world is changing around us, and it's really through the trials and developments that we're making that we're really advancing and building the system for the future. So I think our customers are wanting us to go down this path, and I think it's really exciting. But yeah, certainly the speed of change is, in my view, increasing.
Great, thanks, Greg. And I'm really excited to hear that your experience has been that, customers are really sort of driving the speed of this transition. I think it's great to hear that there's so much interest and excitement and engagement with the transition to renewable energy. Hedda, I might go to you now. Obviously, you are doing a lot of work and engaging with customers directly. Has that been your experience as well? And do you find that customers are starting to drive the shift towards renewables?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I'd really sort of echo Greg's point there. I think coming from a policy perspective, I think state government, I think local councils are a bit the sort of neglected player in this space. I think they're pushing things along too with their own sort of targets and associated policies. I mean, I think in some ways I feel like for this panel, I'd almost sort of like to channel what I'm hearing from people rather than my own personal view. I don't know that I'm you know, the right person to know whether it's happening fast or slow, but I can sort of say from the community perspective, I think there's a lot of frustration. I think there's a bit of a sense that it's not happening fast enough, actually. So my sense is that in some ways the community is maybe ahead of some parts of the sector in terms of its willingness to just sort of make it all happen. And I think one of the challenges is because of the fractured nature of what the energy sector is, with, you know, some responsibilities with government policy, some with the market. There isn't a clear, cohesive approach about how we're going to get from A to B. And I think what I hear time and time again in my work is people looking for leadership and a lot of anxiety around the lack of a sense of a long-term plan. So I think my own view around this is that we need to be a bit more open about the fact that we're seeing changes in expectations from the community about the different roles of, you know, not just sort of the energy sector, but communities, you know, the government at various different levels. You know, let's have a conversation about the roles and responsibilities and what's appropriate. And I think there are some lessons that need to be learnt around this. I think a lot of parts of the community have not really enjoyed the responsibility, for instance, about shopping around for the best electricity tariff. I think, you know, we've engaged with people very much in a narrow way around sort of electricity tariffs, and that's not really worked for everybody. So I think we need to learn from the way that we have been engaging with people and actually meet them where they are at and where and how they want to be engaged.
Great, thanks, Hedda. Some really important points that you've raised there, and we'll certainly explore them as the panel continues. Ray, I might go to you now for your thoughts on this particular question. Obviously, it's a little bit different for you over in WA, but how has your experience been? Do you think, you know, you're working on a different network over there, but how has your experience been? Do you feel like the transition is moving at an appropriate pace? And what's your experience been with your customers over in WA as well?
Oh, look, sure. This is really, really good question, Laura. So I think we've come a long way over here in the West. Okay, there've been some remarkable achievements in recent times, and there's a significant renewable pipeline, not just in WA, but across the entire country. Excuse me, which is incredibly exciting, but look, this is just my opinion. I think we've still underestimated the demand for a more sustainable and lower carbon economy. Not just from our customers, they're certainly driving higher expectations, but also the communities that we operate in. And interestingly, I think investors as well, who have started to become a lot more influential in this space, which of course puts pressure on all of us to get things done sooner and faster, right? So, a bit like Hedda, speaking from our own perspective, you know, to handle the transition in the most efficient, effective and successful way possible, I think what I can reflect on is some critical success factors so far for us. And you know, we're still learning, and we've, you know, not a shining example, but I think we're doing a pretty good job. First of all, we've made absolutely sure that energy transition is front and center of our business strategy. Okay, you can't treat this as a sort of a side project or anything like that, or side ambition. And you've got to be very specific about the transition goals and targets that you need to regularly communicate and measure progress against. These become your touchstone for knowing if you're heading in the right direction and at the right speed. And they'll help you navigate through the noise that inevitably arises and steers you off course. From a transition perspective itself, I think, again, based on our own experience, the strategy needs to keep a close eye on three things: innovation, impact, and economics. So I think it goes without saying, you need to be innovating, and that's in order to help you shape and change what's happening so that you're on the front foot. We've been investing in various DER trials for the last 3 years in order to learn and inform our next set of decisions. I think you also need to have a very clear understanding of your role and the impact you want to have with your customers and communities, and to become better corporate citizens today's society, you're going to be judged on a broader scorecard that includes your impact on native title, environmental justice, and other issues such as diversity, inclusion, and equity. So to that end, what we've done is we've invested an inordinate amount of time, energy into community co-creation events to get a much better understanding and a more detailed understanding of what it is that they want in this energy transformation journey. And you know what we've discovered is that we can't assume that all of our microgrids want the very same thing. They have a fundamentally different set of drivers depending on which town, community you're looking at. And very quickly, with respect to economics, there's no shortage of investment interest around the country in renewables and zero carbon projects. But I think to make the changes you need to make will require capital. And to secure that, what we've discovered is we've really had to focus on leadership, on performance, and the potential to create new value. I think if you sort of bear those things in mind, then you're sort of getting off to a good foot in terms of that question around efficient, effective, and successful transition to this new world we're talking about.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ray. That was a really great summation of, I guess, the variety of the steps that you need to consider as part of the transition, and some areas where people can really focus their attention to ensure that they are able to participate in this transition effectively and efficiently. Something that came up in all of your answers was the fact that, you know, customers are keen to embrace renewable technologies. They're keen to get involved. So we know that we've got the buy-in at the customer level, but I'm just interested to know, what are the challenges that are holding us back? What are the real what's the single biggest issue that is holding us back when it comes to the integration of renewables into the grid right now? Because we know customers are keen to come on the journey. So what's holding us back? Now, Hedda, I might go to you first, because you touched on the issues that come with government policy and a lack of energy policy. Is that, to you, one of the big ones that really stands out in your mind?
Look, I think it's part of it, absolutely. And look, I think there'll probably be a bunch of technical issues like around interoperability that I'm not best placed to speak on. But I guess from a sort of social science perspective, the biggest gap that I can see that seems to kind of come up time and time again is a lack of trusted organisations that can play the sort of intermediary role between householders and the grid. And, you know, we've heard from Ray about how much work has gone into that at Horizon, and I'm not sure that the rest of the sector has appreciated the kind of investment that's required to build that trust. And I think that's starting to get known. I think I hear this sort of talked about more and more, that people understand that there's a bit of a lack of trust in energy companies more broadly. My sense from the data that we're getting is that this is linked, at least to some degree, to this sense, and this is going to sound very crude, but this is the sort of language that I hear, that people feel that energy companies are ripping off customers. So I think even sort of new players like aggregators face this sort of background concern that people have about energy, the energy market. They feel like it's this very distant thing that they don't have a lot of control over. That's not very transparent. It's not very clear to people. How does the energy market work? And, you know, just to give an example, one solar owner we spoke with, literally the trigger for her going out and buying a solar system was the closure of the Hazelwood plant. And so there was this sense for her that the energy system is not being well managed. You know, we've got these big coal-fired generators, like we have to, it's almost this feeling of like we as citizens have to step up and almost like prop up the energy system, because there is this market and it's chaotic and it's not working. So that's one dimension. I think there's a lack of visible checks and balances with the existing system. So, you know, we do have consumer representation, but they're not hugely well resourced, they're not very visible. And I would say the same thing with the regulator. People sort of allude to oh yes, as a regulator, but it's a bit like the banking sector, like what do they do kind of thing. So, I mean, but this might sort of sound really overwhelming for people who are individual companies in your audience who are just like, well, you know, how do we make progress? But I think there is this sort of systemic concern about the way that the system is set up, and that worries people, provides a lot of anxiety. And I think some of the ways that can be overcome is where organisations like networks do team up with community groups, like we've seen in the case of Yakandanda. People will be very familiar with that. So we call these sort of social innovations, grassroots innovations, where it's not imposed by somebody, it's actually the community coming to an organisation and saying, we want to work with you, how can we make this work? And that to me is, I think, you know, a glimmer of hope in how we can sort of start to think about rebuilding trust in the energy system.
Great, thanks, Hedda. Some really interesting and really important insights, I think, that you've been able to gather from your field in liaising directly with customers. Greg, I might go to you now for your perspective as someone who works directly for a utility. What's your experience, and what are your thoughts in terms of what is the biggest single challenge that we have when it comes to integrating renewables into the grid right now?
Yeah, no, like it's an issue we're all, I guess, actively dealing with. And I guess my comments would be that, you know, the grid as it was designed and the whole energy landscape was envisaged. There was a big power station, a supply chain and a customer at one end, a very linear model. And, you know, we all know that that's not the case anymore. So I guess what we see is that we need the license and the, I guess, the flexibility to be able to trial and develop and innovate. And what we're increasingly seeing, and it's been touched on by Hedda and others, that, you know, there are new partners that are coming and wanting to work with us. So we're seeing in Victoria a really big focus on community energy, and, you know, we've signed up with some community energy groups, the Yarra Energy Foundation, and actively exploring the opportunity for community batteries. We've got retailers who are working with us or looking to work with us and excited about some of our projects. And so, you know, a good example is, you know, storage. So storage is something that is going to help support more renewables, support customers with solar to export more. It provides benefits back into the market. And I guess, you know, what we're experiencing is that we need the ability for those assets to be shared across parties, and that the regulations enable that rather than stifle it. So, you know, we see that the closer you put storage to customer load, the more benefits you can capture, and that creates benefits for the whole system and all customers. It reduces the cost of these projects, which is typically being funded through third-party grants at the moment, but in future we're expecting that to fall. So it's really about the flexibility and license to collaborate, and we're really pleased with what we're seeing, because again, community energy is just something that seems to be really, really popular in Victoria, the council level with local community energy action groups and the like. And they're coming to us saying that they'd like to, you know, explore these opportunities. And, you know, at the same time, we're saying, well, we see opportunities for, you know, medium scale batteries, community batteries, pole top batteries to help us manage our networks, deliver customer benefits locally, and you know, where you can avoid upgrades, then that delivers benefits for all customers. So it's really about just being flexible and recognising it's almost like the system's being inverted around the customer, and we can't be sort of be held back by the way maybe things were set up and envisaged in the 1990s, because the world is very different and it continues to change. It's really through that innovation and trialling that we're really advancing and making this energy transition happen. So yeah, they're my thoughts.
Great, thanks, Greg. Really interesting points there. I particularly like your comment about the importance of storage being located close to the network. Hedda, I know that in your work at ANU, you're sort of arguing the same thing, and I think that touches on exactly what Andrew spoke about in his presentation just before as well. So it's great to see some common themes emerging. I'm just going to go to an audience question now, because I have had one that's come through, and this one's for you, Ray. So he has a question just in regard to your point on stakeholders' expectations that the energy system transition starts to happen more efficiently. Are you aware of any examples of of the town planning framework or land use approvals in WA being updated to recognise new technologies like microgrids and battery storage. I know it's quite a pointed question, Ray, and I know you're reasonably new to the industry. So if you need to take it on notice, do let me know. But do you have any insights to add there?
Yeah, look, it's reaching out into an area I'm not that familiar with, but look, what I can say is there's nothing apparent that I'm aware of at this particular point in time. It's a hot topic, right? Because we're confronted with it all of the time, particularly in remote regional areas in WA, okay? So one of the challenges we do have is land acquisition to be able to deploy assets to support some of our projects, okay? And it's been a historical challenge, not just for us, but for others as well. And I think it's one that's still bubbling away, but it almost get a sense that it needs to be solved sooner than later. We see some of the big hydrogen projects, for example, you know, and their requirements for, say, land, okay, and access to land are enormous. And we've just recently seen a couple of them come up against a bit of pushback in that regard, okay, and acquiring that much land is just problematic from a process perspective as well. So it's a great area to explore, and I don't think we've made much progress on it yet, but I feel like it's got to be dealt with sooner than later.
Well, it sounds like, Ray, it's definitely one to watch this space, and it sounds like a great question that is something that we all need to be thinking about as well. Now, I wouldn't mind honing in on some of the various projects that you've all been working on, because we are keen to talk about renewable integration in action. Let's talk about some actual specific projects where we do have some really exciting renewable integration happening. Greg, I'd like to go to you first. You've been heavily involved with Citipower and Powercor's Future Networks program, which will support customers to connect more solar, more batteries, more EVs. To start with, can you tell us a little bit more about this program? So how is it conceived? What does it involve? And what do you hope it will achieve?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess the context for and the background to this one is that on our networks, particularly Citipower, Powercor, we're seeing really strong growth for solar, and we see that continuing. So, you know, for Powercor, we expect that to increase by 50% over the next 5 years. And that's been supported by, you know, customers really enthusiastic about solar, but also the, you know, strong government support through the what's called the Victorian Solar Homes program. So we're seeing really rapid growth and development of new housing developments in our networks, and you know, virtually all of them going with solar. So the challenge with that has been that we get really concentrated clusters of residential solar. You can have problems where you know, people who connect towards the end, you know, or later than others can run into some of these export challenges. And you know, you heard Andrew Dillon earlier talk about the fact that, you know, if networks just say, give a blanket no to customers and say, look, sorry, you're too late to put your solar on the network, you're not able to export, you know, that doesn't go down too well. So the whole genesis was we want to be able to enable residential solar. We want it to be able to be available to the grid more broadly. And, you know, fundamentally, we want, you know, customers to be able to export their energy when it's available. So this whole program was envisaged to, you know, to give those customers, rather than just the customers where there are export constraints, a blanket no, to kind of be more targeted. And we're looking to have about 85% of our customers who have access to exporting, you know, 85% of the time. And, you know, over time, you know, we'll expect, you know, we'll be doing everything we can to improve that as well. So we don't want to just give these blanket no's because we run out of export hosting, and just really highlights, you know, that the challenges that we're seeing, and just with the really strong growth for solar locally, that does cause some sort of congestion points, particularly with voltages, and there are a series of sort of digital and, you know, network interventions that we're making to try and, you know, get around this and really support residential solar, because the way we see it is people have invested in those assets. They want to get good use of them, and if that energy can't get onto the grid, then someone else has to build another power station to produce that energy, and that's a more costly situation for the whole system. So that's really the driver behind it, and it's really wanting to support customer renewable energy aspirations fundamentally.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. And I know there's a significant digital element to this project, which is really integral to ensuring that you are able to achieve that maximum solar penetration into the grid. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that side of things works? And I guess more generally, at what stage of this project did you realise that you were going to need a really significant digital component to fully realise the potential of solar in the grid?
Oh, look, I mean, again, a great question, and it's a complicated issue to how do you actually ultimately sort of ration the available export capacity on the network. And so if you just have pretty basic rules of thumb, then that's not an efficient way to do that. So we've tried to invest in that digital side of it to really improve and hone in and to be much more precise in how we do that, and that's required investments to do pre-approvals. Various algorithms that go into supporting that and understanding more about the local network dynamics when we're assessing those applications. So I guess to answer the question, when did we realise this? I guess what we're seeing is that to enable these developments, there is a complementary digital investment that's required, and I guess it goes to the point that we through other trials, but in terms of where things are going, we really see the networks playing an enabling role. And there are opportunities that we can make to leverage technology, and in Victoria we're very, very lucky and fortunate that we've got the smart meters, and that provides us a really rich set of data that we want to harness and help us to really be as precise as we can with some of these export limits, and going further. Like this is going to lead to more and more discussion and development around flexible exports. The ability to manage the emerging issue of minimum demand. So when you really get the high levels of solar export and that really strong duck curve phenomenon during the middle of the day. And so I guess it's just in recognition that all of that is happening at scale. And just to be honest, that the popularity of solar we're seeing just doesn't show any sign of abating, and that's just been really, really popular with customers. So it's how do we support them? And how do we also support, what's pretty strong government driver down here in Victoria as well?
Great. Thanks, Greg. Really great to hear some of those insights there. Ray, I'd like to go to you now, because I know that you, with a project that you're working on in WA, there's been a similar digital component that's been really critical to the success of your project. So Horizon Power is undertaking a demonstration of a renewable energy future that integrates extensive customer solar into the overall power system through a distributed energy resources management system. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project and what you've learned through the demonstration?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. So if you don't mind, let me start by just giving everyone a little bit more context about Horizon Power and also Onslow, which is where we conducted the DERMS trial. So for those that aren't aware, we're a GTE, government trading enterprise. So our owner is the WA state government. Okay, we have more than 47,000 connections in regional and remote towns, which represent about 100,000 residents and 10,000 businesses. Now that's across 38 power systems, 4 of which are interconnected and the other 34 are standalone microgrids. And for us, for the benefit of the audience, a microgrid is essentially a town. Okay, so historically, we've seen a much slower uptake in our service area of rooftop solar. And that's largely been due to hosting capacity issues that came into play way back in 2011. The cost of resolving this back then was not insignificant, and it would have meant a bit more of an impost on the WA taxpayers. So as a result, 50% of our 34 microgrids are capacity constrained as we speak. In 2018, however, we managed to increase our hosting capacity a little bit, which pretty much got consumed immediately, suggesting an enormous amount of pent-up demand within our customers and communities. Around the same time, there was acknowledgement from our board and the executive team that rooftop solar was inevitable. And we needed to get serious about finding a safe, reliable, efficient way to enable greater levels of rooftop solar and incorporate it in the provision of electricity into our microgrids. So in 2019, we had an opportunity to act by transforming Onslow into what we believe is Australia's most advanced microgrid today. So we partnered with an organisation called PICE in the US and switched in Australia, and we launched our DERMS project, the one that you referred to, in Onslow. Now, Onslow, just for a bit more context, population of about 900 people, it's just shy of 1,400 kilometres north of Perth, has around 530 customer connections, 440 of which are residential. To put it into context, there's 109 households that consume over 30 kilowatt hours per day of electricity. 50 businesses consume over 30 kilowatt hours per day, and there's also one very large commercial customer, Onslow Salt. So there's a reasonably large demand for electricity for the size of the town. And what have we achieved so far? Well, we've deployed the DERMS system around the middle of last year, early last year. It's orchestrating, optimizing, and controlling customer and utility assets to support a very high level of renewable energy within the system. So the assets that it's looking after as we speak today is approximately 1,340 kilowatts of residential solar, which is made up of 261 systems. There's 640 kilowatts of commercial industrial solar, which is made up of around 8 systems. There's 190 kilowatt hours of residential energy storage in 19 systems. And there's 361 kilowatt hours of commercial and industrial smoothing storage, which is across 8 systems. There's also a 1 megawatt utility solar farm, a 500 kilowatt utility power station BESS, a 1 megawatt hour utility network BESS, in addition to a centralized gas power station. So just wanted to quickly paint a bit of a picture for what DERMS is looking after for everyone. I feel that's quite an important bit of context there. A few weeks ago, we got to a point in our project where we were able to undertake a test of the system, and we managed to transition from gas operation to 100% solar PV and battery operation. For us, that was an enormously significant moment. The hydrocarbon off event lasted for 80 minutes, and the town was served by approximately 700 kilowatts of domestic solar and 600 kilowatts of utility solar, with the grid being formed by the power station BESS and solar smoothing from the zone substation BESS. And all of that was orchestrated by our DERMS system. So it was a pretty momentous moment for us in our backyard. And we've got this great little video of the project team as they got to that point celebrating, which always brings a smile to my face whenever I watch it, even after seeing it about 50 times now. But I think the key things coming out of it are some of the learnings, which I'm more than happy to share with everyone. Right, so DERMS itself, still an emergent technology. We've invested a lot of time helping develop the solution with our partners. Grid awareness, it's a data-intensive exercise, and we've had to address a lot of data quality issues to get to this point. The communication protocols for DER, they're still new. There aren't a lot of choices and vendor support for it. And IoT DER edge control, it's not plug and play yet. So still a way to go on that front. In terms of the controller philosophy, it's still evolving. So from a microgrid perspective, there's, for us, we've had to learn about the balance between the load on the network and the available penetration of solar and stored energy at any given time. So there's been a lot at play in this journey for us, a lot of lessons learnt. The opportunity to run hydrocarbon off changes throughout the year and the seasons, and it requires a significant overplanting of DER to manage extended periods of HOF all year round. But probably there's sort of the technical bits and pieces. What I would come back to though is the customer relationship, okay? How much are they prepared to accept curtailment of their DER throughout the year? That's been one of the biggest aspects of the journey for us. And our relationship with customers who have their solar PV is changing, and it requires significant investment in that relationship, as does any marriage, I guess. So there's a few of the key points in terms of the learnings for us, Laura. Hopefully they resonate with some of your audience out there, or helpful.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Ray. And that 80-minute milestone that was just recently achieved was, it was incredibly exciting, and we were all really pleased along there with you. Now, looking at the time, it is getting quite close to 3 o'clock. And Hedda, I know you do need to leave right on 3 p.m, but I did just want to squeeze in one more question for you. So your area of research and an area that you've done a huge amount of work in is around community batteries. We've touched on those a couple of times today, but I'd just love to hear from your perspective, just a little bit more information on how community batteries are being used in Australia currently and how you can see that evolving in the short to medium term.
Sure. Yes, it's a great question. I think, yeah, look, there's a few different examples of community batteries that have been rolled out, and I think it sounds like you've touched upon those a bit today. I think they're driven by, you know, quite a wide variety of motivations depending on who it is that's sort of driving the project. I think it's difficult to say how they'll evolve. I think from a community perspective, they tick so many boxes, but it's going to come down to, you know, what values is the battery seen to provide to the community? How do the proponents of these projects engage the community? How can its existence give confidence to people that the energy transition is really happening and it's happening in the public interest? These are the questions that I hear back at me when I talk to people about community batteries. And I think something that a little bit concerns me is I see that proponents are often, even with these really early models, coming up with quite complicated sort of engagement structures for people in terms of particular products or investment opportunities. And I guess I'm not personally convinced that the community is quite ready for that level of engagement yet. I think we need to give people time to understand the basics of what the battery is, to understand the various ways that they could be involved. And that takes a long time for people. I mean, I think based on a bunch of other works that I've done with VPPs and so on, I think often technical people, because they're designing the products and they're working with them day to day, they sort of assume that you just explain something to somebody once and they'll just, my apologies, but they'll just sort of pick it up and run with it. But you know, there's lots of different dimensions to a new technology, lots of different aspects of it that people need to get their head around. And so I'm a little bit concerned about how quickly we're rushing into, here's a product that you can, you know, particular tariff or something, when, you know, as we've learnt with solar more generally, we really need to be careful about making sure that everybody is being brought along with these different types of technologies and ways of engaging in the energy transition.
Great, thanks, Hedda. Some really important insights there for us all to take on board. It is 3 o'clock, but I do have one more question that I'd like to squeeze in. This is one that's come from one of our attendees. Greg, I'd like to put this one to you. And I think it's touching on the fact that you did mention smart meters in one of your answers earlier. So this question's from David, and he's just wanting to know, what value do you see in having smart meters on every home and business? Not just those with solar. Obviously, as our Victorian panellist, you do have the benefit of that data that you mentioned before. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about what benefits you have seen and have been able to sort of take advantage of by having this data?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we are blessed, I guess, in Victoria, where we do have this rich data set. So at our LV level, we have much greater visibility as to what's happening. You can just design solutions that'll be, as I said earlier, much more precise than you would otherwise. And for example, in the area of community batteries, that there's a requirement to sort of be able to net off flows that are going into the battery between customers and the battery. And while we don't have all the data we would like, we're in a better position to say other jurisdictions where we can do some of that virtual net settlement. But ultimately, like as we move towards a system where there's greater and greater penetrations of DER, and as we're building DERM solutions and the like, you know, the richness and the ability for us to develop, you know, it's a really accurate view of what's happening at that LV level is really supported by that AMI data. And for example, things like if we're wanting to do state estimation and LV load flows, you know, the quality and accuracy of our data is much, much stronger than it would otherwise be. So, and I guess the other thing that we've found a lot of real benefit from the AMI fleet has been just in the network analytics that we've been able to do. So, you know, we're able to detect shocks before they happen and can avoid that. So it's a safety benefit, but even just the overall way we're able to hone in and run our networks and design solutions around that and manage voltages, yeah, really supported by that rich AMI data, you know, platform, for want of a better word. So no surprise, you know, we're
Fantastic.
a fan. So.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sure that there are plenty of utilities around the country that are very envious of those of us in Victoria with access to that kind of data. Well, looking at the time, we've gone past 3 o'clock, so I will have to wrap things up here. But once again, a huge thank you to all of our 3 panellists, Greg, Hedda, who's had to depart, and Ray for taking part. And thank you to all of our attendees at home who submitted questions. So thank you again for joining us, panellists. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone.